The Document Object Model, or DOM, is essentially a programming interface that represents a web page structure. You can think of it as a trio of objects where every HTML element is a node in that tree. Browsers use the DOM to let programming languages like JavaScript dynamically access and update the content, structure, and style of the page. To see how it works, let's start with this example. In this example, we have a form. Inside the form, we have a label, a text box, and a button, and we wrap them with the div tag. Underneath of the div tag, we have an unordered list, which is currently empty. The unordered list has an ID. You know that if we want to access an element in JavaScript, we should assign an ID to that element. We have other approach, but the best approach is to assign an ID. At the end of the page, we linked a JavaScript file. In the stylesheet file, we define 3 rules. The JavaScript file is already empty. Let's start with adding an event handler or event listener to this add button. Before doing that, actually we need to have access to this button. There are some ways to find an element. For example, you can find an element by its ID or by its class. Sometimes you can find an element by its parent or its child. There are different ways, but let's start with this function, getElementById. So I go here in JavaScript and define a variable, a const variable, because it will be fixed during our project. Let's call it btn. Then by calling getElementById method of the document object and passing the ID of this element, which in this case is add, we establish a connection between our code and the HTML page. You see, you can do whatever you want with this object. For example, by using text content, you can change the content, the text content of the element, which in this case is the caption of the button. Let's assign, for example, modified. You'll see that it's applied on the fly. Note that we didn't put this code in any function. So this code will be executed as soon as it's loaded by the browser. We want to add an event handler or event listener to this button actually. To do that, we need to write the object which refers to the element and then use add event listener method. Add event listener method takes 2 parameters. The first one is actually a string which specifies the event. The event is click, and the second one is a callback function which will be called whenever that event happens. You can define the function here, or you can define a separate function like function test and just type the name of the function here. Let's say alert hi. To test this, actually, we need a real browser. So I open the preview in an external browser, in this case, Google Chrome. When I click on this button, see a message that we specified here. Okay, if the function is a short function, you can actually use an arrow function here. So this is the function, and inside parentheses we define the parameters that this function is supposed to get. In this case, we don't need any parameter, and after arrow we define the body of the function. If it just contains a single instruction like alert, you can just type the function. But if it is more complicated, you can wrap your code with curly bracket and add multiple comments like I++ alert I, and let's define var I equal 1. Now you can see the result. Whenever I click on this button, the collection of instructions defined inside the curly brackets are executed. The event handler actually can have a parameter like E, which actually refers to the object which caused this event. So let's use it. E has a property like target that points to the element. So you can use property like text content or whatever you want to manipulate that object. In this case, whenever I click on this, it shows the caption of the element. Okay, now let's define two other variables. txt document that get element by ID. Okay, let me see what's the ID of this text box. It's task. So here I should type task. Also const lst document get element by ID. The ID of this list is list. So here I should type list. Now in my JavaScript code, I have access to this button and to this text and the list that is empty at the moment. Okay. Assume we want to add the text in this text box to the list whenever a user press this add button. To add something to a list, we need to create an li item and add it to the children of the UL element, because each UL element can have only some Li children. Let me delete these two lines. To create an Li element, we use create element method of the document object as its parameter. We pass the type of the element that we want to create. Okay, to use this element, we need to assign it to a variable. Let's say const li equal this. Now we created an element and assigned it to a variable. Now we can add whatever we want to the text section of the li element. Here in this case, actually we want to assign the value of this text box. Note that the value, whatever you see here, is actually the value of the text box. So we type txt.value. Then we need to add this element to the children of our list, and we know that lst is point to the list, so we type lst that append child li. If I type something in the text box and press the add button, the form is submitted to the server, so we don't see the effect of this code. Why? Because by default, whenever a user clicks a button inside the form gets submitted. So we need to somehow cancel this default behavior. Fortunately, it's simple. That's just enough to add this line of code to the beginning of our function. Prevent default method does this for us. So now whenever I type here something and press the add button, the text here is added to the list. Okay. We can clear the value of the text box after adding it to the list. It's good to change the keyboard focus back to the text box. So it's easy. You need to type the name of the object and then call focus function. Now, after adding the text to the list, as you see, the focus of keyboard goes back to the text box and it's ready to enter the next value. So users don't need to use mouse.